Phil Kutzko, who is a professor of mathematics emeritus at the University of Iowa and director emeritus at the Math Alliance. Phil, thanks for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure. I want to say hi to everybody. I'm sure I know a lot of people in the audience. I'm doing this by actually reading something. So if I look down or something, don't be surprised. It's not my usual style. It's my pleasure this afternoon to introduce Bill Vélez, who is a professor of mathematics emeritus at the University of Arizona. It's not my purpose here to introduce Bill to you in the literal sense. Indeed, given Bill's fundamental role in broadening participation throughout his career, as well as his remarkable work in increasing the number of math majors at the University of Arizona and the many articles he has written, I am sure that no introduction is needed at a conference such as this. Rather, at Bill's request, my purpose is to give you some context for the talk you're about to hear. Bill's talk today is an elaboration on some of the major points of an article, Mathematics Holds the Key to Increasing STEM Enrollment of US Students, that appears in the AMS blog e-mentoring network in the mathematical sciences. And Bill is going to give a reference to this in his slides, so you'll be able to look it up. I hope you take a good look. This paper was originally submitted to the notices at AMS, and after a lengthy and somewhat fraught procedure, was rejected. I became involved in this process at Bill's request and will be writing about it as an example of the need for organizations such as AMS to develop procedures and more generally policies that reflect the increasingly diverse and culturally heterogeneous nature of our profession. What was a bit disturbing to me, and what I would like to share here, was one might call the reactive nature of the response to Bill's article, both by a series of referees who were chosen by the notices, and sadly, by some members of the editorial board itself. As you will hear, Bill is raising concerns about policy decisions by many of our best mathematics departments, as well as by our funding agencies that have resulted in an increase in the percentage of PhDs in mathematics awarded to international students from about 25% in 1980 to almost 60% by 1992. He argues persuasively, I think, that these decisions work against our stated goals of increasing the number of underrepresented US minority citizens, and one might add US women in our professions, and that they should be examined carefully. This seems to me to be a serious and, serious and somewhat pressing concern from an important minority voice in our profession. Yet from the response Bill got, one might almost think that folks were confusing him with a xenophobe, or at least that they needed him to explain as part of his article that he wasn't one. So folks, it is my pleasure to introduce my good friend, Bill Vélez. For those of you who know him and admire the work he has done and the life he has led, you're in for a big treat. And for those of you who sometimes hear the barbarian at the gate, when Bill and others of us who think like Bill make our points, please relax. We are on your side. We don't want to tear anything down. We just want to make it better for everyone. And with that, I give you Bill Vélez.
Thank you so much, Phil. Thank you to the organizers of this conference for this opportunity to speak about this important topic. You know, as we look towards the future and make plans to change graduate programs, I think it's important to look to see what the situation has been for minority mathematicians in the. So mathematics has dramatically changed. Well, actually not mathematics, but its applicability. And now more than ever, mathematical and statistical education is essential to join the technological workforce. This education can lift a person out of poverty and provide them the privileges that we ourselves enjoy as professionals. My decision to major in mathematics dramatically changed my life. It brought me out of poverty and allowed me to travel the world. And it allowed me to join my colleagues in living a life of privilege, having a steady job and a paycheck, owning a home, working in a safe environment. Can we emphasize that enough? Having health insurance and retirement plans. So because of this job, I travel the world, and financially, I am better off than most of my siblings because I chose to study mathematics, but not travel. My younger brother, Gilbert, began his career playing mariachi music when he was 12. And because of this music, he has traveled the world. But he also has other skills. So he's an nth degree black belt in Kempo karate. I forgot what N is right now. But to me, he is a symbol of beauty and power in our community. But I digress. So what is a graduate program in the mathematical statistical sciences for? Is its sole purpose to create knowledge and knowledge creators? In conjunction with this, is its goal to produce researchers who continually publish new results? Well, here's an interesting study that was published in 2005. So Grossman points out that almost 50% of PhDs published one paper, and 75% published no more than 5 papers in their lifetime. Now, if this is the goal of graduate education, we cannot view it as successful. So creating mathematical and statistical researchers can't be the only goal. Society has many needs, and mathematical and statistical graduate programs need to address these. So I would like to take a minute here for you to write down in the chat box what some of the needs of society could be met with mathematical and statistical training. And let me just stop for about a minute here. You're chatting away, I hope. I can't see the chat boxes, but I'm hoping that.
Abby, you're
Abby, are you
muted.
talking?
I don't think I've ever been in a Zoom meeting where I have not done that. Okay, let me read them to you.
No, don't read them. We're gonna archive them and let's see if we can discuss them at some point, because this really is an important topic for what it is that we're trying to do. So if you didn't have time to write, please think about this and let us know what you're thinking. So the minority community has been almost invisible in the mathematical and statistical enterprise. And this invisibility perpetuates itself. Now, there are 21 Native American reservations in the state of Arizona alone. So when you look at your faculty, when you look at your graduate student population, your undergraduate students, when was the last time a member of the Apache Nation graced your halls, or Tohono O'odham, or the Yaqui, or the Gila River Band, or the Zuni, or the Dene, or the Havasupai, and members from Fort Mojave? Where do you see these individuals in the mathematical enterprise in today's society? They're invisible. And because they're invisible, we don't have to worry about them. So I was the first Chicano to earn a PhD in mathematics at the University of Arizona in 1975. I was the first Chicano hired in a tenure track position in mathematics at this university in 1977. When I retired in 2018, I was the last Chicano hired in a tenure track position in mathematics at the University of Arizona. Whatever it is that the mathematical enterprise is doing, it seems to be very effective in keeping minority mathematicians out of our universities. So I was a founding member of the Society for the Advancement of Chicanos and Native Americans in Science, and president for 3 years, a very time-consuming job. But you know, I have to ask, why is it that minorities have to expend so much energy in developing these organizations for themselves? Is it that the mainstream societies are unwelcoming or even considered hostile? The number of such organizations, NAM, Association for Women in Mathematics, SACNAS, speaks to this need for us to create spaces in which we can breathe. Now, any minority mathematician knows that they have to do much more to survive than simply do research. So when I began my tenure at the University of Arizona, SACNAS asked me to investigate hiring practice of minorities in the Southwest. And so I looked for Chicano and Native American mathematicians at our PhD granting institutions here in the Southwest. And I chose PhD granting because research is the coin of our realm. And you notice that there were about 8 of us in the 1970s at these universities. Now, this was the climate in the 1970s. You notice that there were about 25, 26% international students getting their degrees from our PhD programs, which I consider to be a reasonable percentage. And then things started to change in the 1980s, and the percentage of international students began to rise, so that now the percentage of international PhDs in mathematics has been hovering over 50% since this time. But there have been other things that have impacted the American mathematical community. There have been groups of individuals, very well-trained individuals, that have entered the market here in the United States. And these individuals have impacted the careers of American mathematicians. Now, there's no question that international faculty bring in new ideas, new ways of addressing problems. Mathematical research is richer because of these contributions. There's simply no question about it. But this has come at a cost. This has come at a cost of individuals having to move from their universities to lower quality institutions, having to stop publishing relatively early in their careers. And is this a price that we should be paying so that in the United States, we can prove more theorems? So is research the driving force behind graduate education in mathematics? Or should we think of the mathematical enterprise as somehow helping people get out of the poverty that so many minority communities have suffered through? Now, here's something rather interesting. So beginning in the 1980s through the 1990s, the research capacity of many mathematics departments began to grow as we had more international scientists joining us and more international graduate students receiving their degrees. Departments that used to be more research intensive prior to 1980 realized that they could hire more research intensive faculty. And sort of like as a gift, department heads and deans saw these NSF research grants dangling before their eyes. And they simply had to hire these folks. But as the research capacity of our graduate programs rose, the number of math majors fell. That's very odd. Having more prominent researchers in our departments, having more people doing research, this did not translate to the mathematical community. And in fact, not only did the total number of math majors decrease, but the percentage as of total degrees also decreased. And what that meant is that there were fewer domestic students who could go on to graduate programs. So this made the situation even more severe. Yet, you know, there's still capacity in our students. You can see the number of students who took the AP exam, the exam for first semester calculus in high school. This number is over 300,000 now, and even second semester calculus. Now, over the years, I have seen tremendous numbers of well-prepared undergraduates arriving at our gates. And what has happened is the math department has ignored this mathematical preparation. So we are turning over graduate education to bringing in large numbers of international students. If this represented our dependence on oil, this would be unacceptable. So what happened after the 1980s began? Well, again, I made a survey of Chicano and Native American mathematicians that were hired by PhD granting institutions in the Southwest. And, oh, sorry, there was one. And you can see some details of this in this very nice book that Pat Kenshaft wrote. One person was hired in 2 decades. Again, whatever barriers have been set up to prevent minorities from participating in the mathematical and statistical life of this country have proven to be very effective. Decades passed without departments that serve large number of minorities, and yet they hired no one. What might have caused this? Now, we know that academic jobs were very scarce in 1980 through the 1990s, and we're beginning to see that again. And I was talking to a department head about their graduate program, and he said they don't even bother to recruit US students for their graduate program. It's just too much work. They can get all of their graduate students from India. When I was a program officer in 1992 at the National Science Foundation, I directed the Algebra and Number Theory program. I was giving a talk at a university about NSF and stuff, but they also wanted me to give one on diversity. So I gave one on the efforts that I had on in trying to increase the number of minority graduate students. And a professor got up during the colloquium in public, in a loud voice, and said, I don't recommend mathematics for anyone because the job market is so bad. Now, it's nice that this white mathematician was concerned about our careers. And his statement was very indicative of the attitudes that mathematicians have about who should be majoring in mathematics. So I think that most mathematicians believe that the only reason that you get an undergraduate degree in mathematics is because you're going to get a graduate degree. Otherwise, you're wasting your time. Whereas I was talking about increasing the number of undergraduate mathematics majors. And people would often say, well, what would a person do with an undergraduate degree in mathematics? So this statement I found very disturbing. And I pointed out to this person that minorities should participate in all aspects of American life. And I think we deserve the opportunity to be unemployed mathematicians and statisticians. Now, this was, of course, in the 90s, right? And then this article in Science came out in 2017. So this was a reaction to the barriers that the Trump administration was placing on the visas of international students. And so the administrators, and they quoted administrators from Purdue, said, administrators have the option of admitting students who previously would not have made the cut, including more, oh my gosh, more domestic students. But educators are loath to move the bar if it would lower the quality of the talent pool. You know, having to bring in domestic students. Now, if they feel this way about white domestic students, what are their hidden feelings about the minority population? Now, conversations that I have had with graduate directors about GRE drive me crazy. They say, you know, quite stridently that the international students have higher GRE scores. How can we possibly turn down these students that have such high GRE scores compared to the lower GRE scores that US students have? And I find it hard to believe still that US mathematicians do not understand the difference in the culture of preparing US students to international students. So at the end, there is an article that recently appeared in Focus about the difference in education between US students and students in Mexico, though there is nothing special about Mexico. This is what happens in all countries. Essentially, if you earn a bachelor's degree in mathematics from almost any other country, it is equivalent to a master's degree here in the United States. So why are we comparing these GRE scores? And besides that, in mathematics, we value creativity, and yet we evaluate admission based on knowledge. We don't want knowledgeable people as prospective graduate students. We want graduate students who can be taught mathematics, and then they can use it creatively to address today's problems. So again, I want to ask you, what is a graduate program in the mathematical sciences for? You know, if I would have received my degree just a few years later, I would not have been able to obtain a job at the University of Arizona. And this is what happened to decades of minority mathematicians. They were not given a chance to participate in a research-intensive university to develop their research careers. You talk about reparations. I think this data is an argument for exactly that. But more than that, generations of minority students have lost this opportunity to have minority mentors at their home institutions. Now, I think that domestic students should have this opportunity to attend the best graduate programs in this country. Yet, some of our graduate programs are simply out of reach of domestic students. I once had a student turned down by this pretty good math department. And I was livid that they would turn down this amazing woman, 4.0 student, graduated in 3 years, well prepared. So I called up the graduate director. And that person said, you know, we only accept students who have had graduate courses. You know, doesn't that rule out a great many of our liberal arts bachelor degree granting institutions? What are graduate programs for, if not to teach you graduate level mathematics? Now, I understand that I've seen these advanced students, and I've seen students from my own department take graduate level courses and go on to good graduate programs, but really, that should not be a requirement. And these graduate programs continue to establish barriers to prevent good students from applying, being accepted to, and becoming wonderful mathematicians through their graduate programs. We need to look at these programs to make sure that these barriers are removed so that US students can participate fully in graduate education. Now, many mathematics departments, actually STEM departments, receive grants to fund their research. And just as one example, the 5-year federal STEM education strategic plan had several bullet points, but I just want to emphasize one of these. So it's to increase diversity, equity, and inclusion in STEM and provide all Americans with lifelong access to high quality STEM education, especially those historically underserved and underrepresented in STEM fields and employment. The full benefits of the nation's STEM enterprise will not be realized until this goal is achieved. So what does the federal government want? The federal government, in awarding grants, wants you to support the goals of the federal government. That's not difficult to understand. And why is it that top graduate programs continue to receive federal support for their research projects, yet blatantly refuse to support this goal? In this paper that was just turned down by the notices, I pointed out that the top 20 or so departments graduated 2 minorities last academic year, 2 in 22 departments. I don't know. I think we should place a moratorium on funding departments that continue to ignore the goals of the federal government until these departments exhibit progress in minority education. These are the stated goals, and these departments are flaunting them. So now what? Well, you know, even if you were interested in diversifying your graduate program for the next academic year, there is a little problem. You have to find minority undergraduate math and stat majors. And these don't appear in quantity. And so I am bothered by these graduate programs that not only do not produce minority PhDs, but they also don't produce large numbers of minority undergraduates. I have to ask, are these prestigious graduate programs part of the solution, or are they part of the problem? So I think the first task in creating a diverse pool of students for our graduate programs is for departments to start looking at their undergraduate program of study and looking at ways of increasing minority participation. But you know, I think we need to refocus and reconstruct our undergraduate programs of study to attract more students. I think many of the undergraduate curriculums are simply stagnant. You see nothing in these programs that was proved after 1920. You know, it's like they're teaching the history of mathematics, and they're wondering why mathematics isn't so interesting. Now, I am not saying that the goal of an undergraduate degree is to pursue a graduate degree in mathematics. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that we need to develop a more interesting undergraduate program of study so that more students will come and take more mathematics courses, hopefully become mathematics majors, and then a few of them will decide to go on to pursue graduate studies. In the work that I did with undergraduates, here was my suggestion to them. Just take the next math course. Now apply induction, and we have mathematics majors. Now, you know, this country has dramatic needs right now. We have needs in cybersecurity and data analysis and mathematical modeling. These are very important fields that have tremendous applications. But our departments aren't offering these. Now, here's a very odd thing I learned a couple of months ago. Community colleges are developing data science programs in order to improve the workforce. But the problem is that once these students complete their program of study at the community college, they can't transfer to a university to continue on those studies. We're losing huge numbers of students that could be attracted to a much more quantitative course of study. So I think our graduate programs should serve the needs of these country, including the education of our citizens. I think departments are simply too inward looking. They want to drive their own research programs. In fact, when many departments become under stress, they will give up the teaching of entry-level courses to adjunct faculty so that they can run their graduate program. This serves to dissuade students from continuing on in mathematics. Now, we've recently seen on the streets of this country. The unrest that is plaguing us because of the lack of opportunities that minorities have. And I have to join my colleagues, my friends out there in the street and say, we can't breathe. For decades, the minority community has been denied mathematical and statistical breaths required to live in today's society. Decades have passed without a nurturing environment from the mathematical community to promote the careers of domestic and minority students. This lack of mathematical and statistical oxygen has had negative and dramatic economic repercussions on our minority community. Hopefully, the deliberations of this conference will set an agenda to help repair these injustices. And here are some articles that might be of interest to you. Thank you much.
Thank you so much, Bill. If we can do a silent round of applause for Dr. Vélez. We have a couple of questions from Slido. One was, can you say more about the training of mathematicians in Mexico and how that compares to what's happening in the US?
I can. Now, sorry, I have to look at a new slideshow. Can you see it?
Yes.
Not yet?
I think this is still the same one.
This is the same slide?
Yeah, it's not the one that you shared yesterday that was comparing the Mexican curriculum.
Okay.
This
Now
is the
can you
one
see
from
it?
today. Yeah.
This is still the one from today?
No, this is the one about the Mexican curriculum. Thank you.
This one here. Okay. So I wrote this article with Alicia Prieto Langorica, who was an undergraduate at the university in Guanajuato. And what we did was we compared how we became math majors. When she was 13, she was selected to participate in the Mexican Mathematical Olympiad. Then she spent 3 years training to represent the state of Jalisco in the Mexican Mathematical Olympiad and the national one. And because she had this training, she was recruited by several of the elite graduate programs in Mexico. Now, how do you become a math major in Mexico? Well, you don't decide to show up at a university and say, I want to be a math major. You have to be admitted into the program. She was admitted with a scholarship. Of the 30 or 40 students that were her entering class, at least 30 of them had participated in training for the Mexican Mathematical Olympiad. As opposed to me, who took 4 years of college, calculus wasn't offered. And I just arrived at the university as an engineering major, flunked out of that. And then in my sophomore year, selected mathematics. But here's the course of study for a math major. In their first semester, they take calculus using Spivak. In fact, when you talk to many international mathematicians, they will tell you that they never studied calculus in college. They started with real analysis. So they take 3 semesters of Spivak. They take a year of linear algebra in their first year. One of these traditional courses in Euclidean geometry, a course in elementary mathematics, which is discrete mathematics. In their 4th semester, they're taking abstract algebra. In their 5th semester, they're taking analysis using Rudin, and they're studying Lebesgue theory, topology, differential geometry. You can see the other courses. In their 4th year, They are usually taking graduate courses, and in their 5th year, they continue to take some courses, and they write a thesis. So it can take 5 years for a student to graduate. Now, here are some sample problems from the first semester course in linear algebra in Mexico. Prove that the space of n by n matrices over the field F has dimension Mn by exhibiting a basis for that space. This is the first semester. And what are our students doing? They're studying calculus, hopefully. And you can see here some of the problems that they are addressing in their first semester. So by the time students arrive to become mathematics major at these elite universities, their problems, their proof writing skills are already well developed, and they're learning very advanced mathematics. Did that answer your question, or is there some follow-up?
So that was the question, is to say more about the training of mathematicians. And Pamela, I don't know if you would like him to describe more beyond just the undergraduate training. But there are some other related questions about whether mathematicians themselves are overly trained in math. That is, let me just read this. What are your thoughts on mathematicians being overly trained in math? A stronger community understanding of ethics, history, critical race theory, and public policy would help mathematicians navigate the world of math. PhD and math major programs could require a course on these topics. And sort of as a counterbalance to that, someone else pointed out that one big difference is that in American universities, we have this liberal arts curriculum where students are required to study many other things without that deeper focus.
So you're right about the undergraduate program of study being a liberal arts education, right? So undergraduates are only allowed to take, well, I mean, not allowed, but usually take 1 or 2 math courses a semester, and you can compare that. So, so I'm retired now, and as I look back, I spent an entire summer preparing for prelims. I don't know, it seems like a waste. I took oodles of algebraic topology, and I don't know, I took, and it's all fun, right? I mean, all of this was great fun. But that's not preparing us for what it is that we do when we complete our studies. You have to serve on committees. You have to write grants. You have to teach. You have to worry about diversity issues. And by the way, 1/3 of the recent PhDs are going into industry. So computing is now ever more important in the training of mathematics. So yeah, I really think that we have to start thinking about a different program of study. And I thought that's what this conference was launching, was an investigation into how we can create a more diverse graduate program and rethink our graduate programs. So this idea of having a liberal arts degree, a PhD in mathematics, is kind of intriguing, but maybe we can discuss that, right?
I wanted to ask you something about your time in NSF and the departments that flaunt the NSF stated commitment to equity and diversity. NSF grants require these statements of broader impact, and yet I think for many proposers that becomes something they pay lip service to, perhaps. What do you think about the notion of if that was replaced by a requirement that they state how they're going to address diversity and equity within the topic of the research of the proposal itself? For example, even if you're doing some research about a mathematical topic, you might be mentoring some minority students or you could have a more direct commitment.
Well, so I was there in '92, and I shouldn't flaunt this, but I was given a very prestigious award in June 1993 because I was running the Algebra and Number Theory program. And the award is June 23rd, 1993, Bill Vélez is not a public fool day, because Andrew Wiles had requested support from the program I was running, and I funded him. So that was pretty good decision. Back then in '92, the broader impact statements were absolutely silly. This was 20 years ago, right? So I don't know what the requirements have been. I hope that they are more serious. Now, when I was a program officer handling the Algebra and Number Theory program, I told investigators that if they wanted to receive funds to support graduate students, they had to be US citizens or permanent residents. This greatly bothered the community. And of course, they did not institutionalize my suggestion. Now, I am not sure about the suggestion that Abby just made about individual researchers showing how their work is going to impact diversity. But here is something that I would like to say in support of this. I think that if a department is not producing minority and women undergraduates and women and minority PhDs, they're not meeting the needs of this country. And that department and investigators from that department should not be funded on NSF research grants. That's what I think. So it's not so much individual people have to do this, but they have to be part of a community where some of the research funds that a person is getting are going to support perhaps minority students doing something, but they have to be involved in some diversity efforts. Did that answer your question, Abby?
Yes, it did. And Michelle, I think you had a related question that you wanted to ask.
Yeah, well, so it's not a question. So hi, everybody. I'm Michelle. I'm currently at NSF doing the work that Dr. Vélez did many, many years ago. And we still do talk about infamous awards to Andrew Wiles in the Algebra and Number Theory group. But I mean, I think it's worth mentioning, I hear a lot of people say NSF should do this, NSF should do that. NSF is a huge organization of which the Division of Mathematical Sciences is a tiny, tiny, tiny little piece. And what we are allowed to care about in a grant is set for us by the National Science Board. We cannot, as the Division of Mathematical Sciences, simply decide that broader impacts will be replaced by this other thing. It would take essentially the equivalent of an act of Congress to make that change. The National Science Board is filled with presidential appointees, and they tell us what we can care about in merit review. So it's the same thing when people say that we should do doubly anonymous reviewing. We cannot, because the National Science Board tells us that we have to care about the PI's capability to carry out the research plan, and we can't ask the reviewers to judge the PI's capability without knowing anything about who the PI is or where they work. So, I mean, it's not that I don't want to be kind of a downer or tell people that they shouldn't think outside the box, but I think that saying things like it's not super productive to talk about things at that level, because it's not changes that are actually ever going to be made. So you can decide that like NSF is not like a place that should be, you should be working with or whatever, but it's not, it's sort of not it's not a thing that's going to happen in any reasonable time frame. So I think it's much more productive to think about how, like, a lot of the folks in this room sit on review panels. How do you weight the broader impacts, and how much do you let people write basically nonsense and get away with it? You guys are the reviewers, so hold people to some reasonable expectations, and that's a lot more effective than kind of advocating in, abstractly that NSF should change the way it does business. Like, all of you guys are people who can sit on panels, so force us to care about it by what you say in your reviews and what you say in the panel room. Anyway, so that's my
Thank you,
tangent
Michelle.
over.
Yeah, that's an interesting personal
very much.
action that people can engage in by taking responsibility as reviewers for that. Did you have a
Yeah.
responsibility?
So first of all, oh, absolutely. First of all, William is my stage name, so please call me Bill. When people were out on the streets yelling, defund the police, I don't actually think all of them meant defund the police. We have to dramatically change the way we do business. And I have been talking to NSF for 20 years, right, about these issues. I think that NSF could make more changes. That, the top universities exhibit or have a great deal of influence on how NSF or the funding agencies behave. So I think that Michelle is right, that this is not something that we should be complaining about NSF. So I'm going to make a more dramatic and unpleasant suggestion. And that is, we start contacting Congress to impose restrictions on who can be funded on NSF grants. And I think once Congress understands how much money is being spent on the education of international mathematicians, they might balk at that. But there's a problem with this. The problem is that when you ask people from the outside to make internal changes to the way you do things, those changes can be very unpleasant. But I think that that's the way to go. And can I suggest to all of you that you start thinking about contacting your congressman and saying, our universities are not educating our citizens at the graduate level. You need to do something about it.
Thanks. So the next question is from Dave Kung. Dave says, I'm infuriated that the notices refused to publish your piece. They invited me to write a piece on diversity, but refused to publish it if I mentioned the controversy about diversity statements. This is apparently now policy. How do we push back?
I don't know. Maybe Phil has a better idea than I. Would you like to answer that, Phil? You're muted,
Yes,
by the way.
Yes, I've unmuted. Thank you very much. I'm happy the question was asked. Let me make a more general statement and maybe less controversial. It's a question of process versus content here. That is to say, the American Math Society, like any other organization, has to change with the times, and the processes that used to work when it was a white male organization don't necessarily serve us. I was interested to see that it has a blue ribbon committee to concern itself with the crimes of the past, and that people needed to do something about that, apologize. But there is no committee, such as there is, by the way, in both SACNAS, not SACNAS, but the Applied Math Group and the ASA have committees about, in some sense, disrupting the institutional racism in their organizations. AMS, as far as I know, has nothing like that. So my own feeling is that the notices do not have good policy as far as this is concerned. I'm going to try to write about it. What's surprising is the personal nature of the pushback when you try to raise a policy issue with them. They claim they're not racist, they're really wonderful. I'm not sure that that's relevant. I think the only thing that's relevant is what happened to Bill does not seem like a good outcome in terms of what's happened to minority folks. And I'm glad to hear there are others. I'm getting lots of notes about this. I really don't think there needs to be a big fight. I think that people need to have a mechanism within the AMS to look at notices policy and to change it appropriately. And I'd be more than happy to play a role in that if anybody's interested. Thanks.
So thank you, Phil. There have been some other comments in the chat that there have been other minority mathematicians who have faced similar issues. To respond to some of the suggestions you made, Phil, the AMS has 6 policy committees, which are the high-level committees that are charged with recommending policy to the AMS Council. One of them was just added about a year ago, and that is the policy on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So there now is a high-level body that's looking into that. There also is a task force that was formed last summer to investigate the history of racism within the AMS, and so that work is underway as well. And some of the people that are participating in that task force are on this call. So it's at least hopeful to see that some things are
Absolutely. And yeah, and I'm not proposing anything very radical. I'm simply giving a personal experience that it was impossible to have a policy or procedure discussion with the folks in the notices. I'd be more than happy to share those files at some point. They got sort of very tense very quickly. And I haven't had luck, frankly, at the top, certainly not you, Abby, but at the top of AMS with similar sorts of requests, simply to ask what the procedure is for bringing this quickly to people's attention.
Yeah, so I will follow up on this with those of you that are commenting on it, and I want to bring the conversation back to these issues in the context of graduate education, because I think that's what we're here to be talking about most explicitly. One person asked, how can we provide professional development for faculty regarding productive ways to address potential graduate students in mathematics who come from minoritized communities? I get frustrated that they are often addressed from a deficit perspective instead of focusing on building their assets. So that's for you, Bill, if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, I know it's for me. I find this so difficult to answer because there is no one picture of what a minority student is. You know, many people say, well, you should bring in a group of minority students so that they don't feel alone. But so many of us in those early years were the only ones. And these graduate programs were not particularly kind to us. So I was one of 25 new incoming graduate students into the graduate program at Arizona, 25. And I'm the only one who earned a PhD out of that 25. So it's not that math departments are being particularly cruel to minority students. It's that somehow having a PhD and being in control of people's lives gives you power over them. And that power, we see again and again, is abused. So I think that we have to address faculty abuse of students. If faculty stopped abusing students in general, and you know, at this conference alone, we have seen so many examples of this. You know, some of these issues dealing with minority education would begin to decrease. So this is a discussion, I think, that has to be wider than simply my own comments. And I think just having a sense of humanity as you deal with these individuals. I had a very difficult time being an assistant professor at the University of Arizona. I just found it to be an unfriendly environment. And unfortunately, I gave in and I became like those mathematicians until one day, my mother spoke in my head and she told me, "Saluda, mijito." Say hello, my son. That was my function. I needed to go back to being a Mexican American and greeting people the way I did when they came into my home. And that changed my interactions with students. But you know, being in a math department can. So let's talk about the culture of mathematics. Let's fix that, and then perhaps we can address this other issue. And by the way, the same thing holds for having women in mathematics departments.
Yeah, and also in terms of professional development for faculty and getting them to really look at the needs of graduate students, that was what led to the creation of paradigms in the first place, is for faculty to be able to speak to one another and to really work together to solve some of these problems, because it's obviously not a simple answer, but at least with this project, the hope is to get those conversations underway, is how they can change their practices, the culture of their departments, and so on. I just want to point out it's a little bit after 5. I'm happy to continue. Bill, or if you're good, we can keep going for a bit.
We can, but first of all, before people leave, I have to tell you how personally embarrassing it is for me to bring up this issue of international students. Right? I mean, we're all human beings. We should educate the world. It's just that I think we have gone overboard and we are ignoring our populations. So if I made someone feel uncomfortable, I really apologize for this. You know, we're all people here. We're just talking about policy decisions. So please accept my apologies if I did hurt your feelings. But yes, I'm happy to stay on for a while more. It turns out I'm retired.
So you have plenty of time, huh? There was another related question to what you just said, that what do you think it is that there's a benefit to having such a high percentage of international grad students? Why did it become that way?
Well, first of all, these students come in well prepared. So faculty maybe don't have to focus on the entry-level courses. They come in, maybe within a year, they're ready to begin a research project. So, you know, mathematically, that's probably good. I'm sure that many of these people that are coming in, these international, are very creative, but I can't believe the whole bunch of them are more creative than domestic students. It's just, we don't have that system of education that is as demanding as some of these other countries. So, okay, so what's the question again? Why, can you ask the question again?
Why do you think it is a benefit to have such a high percentage of international graduate students? There's some reason why there is interest in having so many international students.
Well, one big benefit to math departments is that they don't have to develop the undergraduate population, right? They don't have to spend time encouraging undergraduates to pursue graduate education because they have a huge talent pool from which to draw around the world. That's a huge benefit. Suppose now that we were to ask, I don't know, pick some university, Harvard, okay? You need to dramatically increase the number of undergraduate mathematics majors that you have so that they can go on to equally elite schools. So not just double them, we need you to triple and quadruple them. How would a department like that take that charge? And that really is necessary. If we are to have more domestic students pursuing graduate studies, we have to have undergraduate students doing undergraduate studies. So maybe I didn't answer the question well. I'd be happy to go over it again with the person that asked, or perhaps the person has some other comments that they would like to make on this topic.
Yeah, if they'd like to enter it again in another question or clarifying, I'd be happy to pass it on to you. Dylan Thurston says, one counter argument to the difference between US and foreign preparation in math is the value of a broad liberal arts education. What is your feeling on this? And he acknowledges that this seems to be addressed in your MAA article, but he hasn't read it in full yet.
Okay, this is our system of education, right? We're not going to change it. Mexico's system of education, they're not going to change it. These are two separate systems of education. Now, one big difference between us and other countries is that they're elitist. They select a few number of students to go into their major program. We allow anyone to become a mathematics major. That's a huge difference. So, if you're an engineering student, for example, you take mathematics from the engineers, not from the math department. It's very segmented. And in fact, I happen to think that's the wrong model for the future. We are seeing now that interdisciplinary knowledge is becoming more effective in addressing the needs of society. And so having a liberal arts education where you have a major in math, but then you have a minor in computer science with supporting courses in science. So here is something that I have seen in our undergraduate population. Okay, I really encourage students to double major in math. I never suggest that they change their major, right? So students double major in math, they graduate, but their interest really is in going into a biology graduate program. Fantastic. These students get into the best graduate programs in the world because they have more quantitative training. And I think this is what happens when you have a liberal arts education. You are afforded the luxury to study various subjects. That does not happen abroad. And you can see that from the schedule that I showed. By the way, I haven't studied all countries, right?
Someone pointed it out in the chat that as universities become more tuition supported, we've sought out that pool of students because we've created a cycle that drives this type of recruiting.
I'm sorry, what cycle? I'm not quite sure.
Well, I believe what the comment means is that as universities have more and more need to collect tuition to support themselves, international students create a better cash flow for them. I believe that's how I read what the comment is.
Yes, like out of state tuition. Well, yes. I didn't write that, but it's out of state tuition is like a huge amount of money, and like the University of California is like, for instance, it really depends on that, and it gets dicey when you talk about like the immigration policies of the Trump administration, as well as like the critique that you're bringing, because there's like financial consequences to having fewer international students.
Excuse me, Bill, would you just unshare your screen so that people can see you bigger? I think people would like to.
I'm sorry, you mean
they'd rather see you than linear algebra. There should be something at the bottom that says stop share.
Yes, thank you. Let me reply to that comment. You're talking about undergraduate students, right? Undergraduate students have to pay out-of-state tuition fees. That's huge, but that's not true for graduate students. We pay for their education.
No, not masters.
Yeah, so you're right. There are, like there was a while they were developing these professional master's degree, and departments were making a lot of money on international students coming in. But for PhD programs, our model is we support students.
Another question with respect to international students, how many of the non-white international students go on to US professorships or other leadership positions in the math community? Why are so many of the faculty in the department still so white, international or not?
We don't collect that data on international students. We collect data on domestic students to indicate if they have a minority status. But international students are not given any kind of minority status. So I don't know the answer to that question. And I'm not sure we have data on that.
Yeah, okay. Ray Levy asks if you could please comment on the role of internship like, where it just scrolled because someone asked me a question. Where'd you go? Can you please comment on the role of internship-like experiences in grad programs as a way to broaden the educational experience? They could take place in many environments like research groups in other fields, industry, government, labs, nonprofits, etc.
Yeah, I absolutely think that our graduate students are not accepting internships, and they're not even applying to it. And part of that is their thesis advisors. They do not want students to spend a summer away from their research. Now, when I was a graduate student, for some reason, I thought that applying mathematics was interesting. And I had an internship at Vélez. It was an amazing summer, right? So we need to convince graduate directors. I'm sorry, I take that back. We need to convince directors of PhD thesis that spending a summer working at NASA or some government lab or a business would greatly improve the opportunities for employment for that student. You know, the fact that when I got my PhD, I didn't want to be a professor, and I got a job at Vélez at Sandia Laboratories. So I worked on atomic weapon systems for 2 years. That changed my perception of what mathematics was used for. So having this kind of internship experience has an impact not only on your job opportunities, but the way you view the applicability of mathematics. But here is something that I would like to propose instead. I propose that faculty apply for research positions with business over the summer and maybe even for a semester, so that they can get a different view. And I'll tell you what would happen. When they realize that they could triple or quadruple their salary, they would leave their faculty position and open up jobs for us, for the younger folks. So absolutely, having an internship opportunity is very beneficial. Now, I heard from a student the other day. She accepted an offer from our graduate program in applied mathematics. And I was surprised. I thought the student should have gone elsewhere, but she accepted it. And one of her reasons was that the applied math program had just gotten rid of the prelim. You don't have to take prelims anymore. That freed up her first summer for an internship. So there are lots of factors involved in this conversation. Did that answer your question, I hope? Of course, you know, if you have some question later on, send me an email. I'm retired, so more than happy to talk to you.
So David Jekyll, if I'm saying that correctly, says, how should we make the math major more interesting? Looking at international math programs, should America be emulating them?
Oh God, no. We do not want to. We do not want to go to this model where you have to choose the major when you arrive at university and you're not allowed to change. Absolutely not. So I'm a number theorist, right? Algebra, that's my bread and butter. But I don't think I don't think we should be teaching modern algebra as part of the math major. Here's what I think. We should teach an undergraduate course, a semester course in cryptography. And you get to do the nice algebra stuff that you need. And if you can interest students enough in the material, then the second semester you offer a continuation where you teach modern algebra. Many departments have a one-size-fits-all program of study. Come on, one-size-fits-all simply does not work. Now, in our department, we have 7 options, plus we just created a new degree in data science. Most of those options do not require abstract algebra and advanced calculus. Statistics, probability, mathematical modeling. And I just saw a study, 5% of our undergraduates go to graduate school in the mathematical sciences. Why are we requiring all of these students to take abstract algebra and advanced calculus if only 5% of them are going to pursue graduate study? That's silly. Did that answer your question, David?
Yes. And I think that you also discussed that before, like after I typed the question. I guess another thing is like people wanting to become high school teachers in math, right? Having to pass the analysis course. And it was so hard for a lot of them, and it felt like, why is the math department forcing us to like do this really hard analysis course? All I want to do is just teach high schoolers. I don't need this. So it was, I think.
How cruel. I absolutely agree with you. That's a cruel thing to do.
And I think it's important that we think about what is the relevant, and I mean relevant very broadly, the relevant mathematics for students to learn. So the question you asked, Bill, about the teaching abstract algebra or analysis to people who are not going to go ahead and use that, you could ask the same question about many parts of trigonometry in high school. And this growing emphasis on statistics and data science is going to challenge, I think, a lot of those assumptions that we've had in our curriculum for a long time.
There's so little flexibility in the undergraduate and graduate programs in mathematics. When you look at engineering, in 1950, there were 3 fields of engineering. At our university, there's like 16 of them now. What? Because they need to meet the needs of industry. But us in mathematics, no, we're pure. And that purity is going to damage us.
Going back to when you were talking about sort of filtering students in the undergraduate level, someone made a comment about the honors programs that some students start in year 1, as freshmen, that often exclude underrepresented minority students just by virtue of the kind of educational experience they've had before they come.
Sure. Yeah, they do, right? There's no question about it. Now, in some way, this is a tough problem for a mathematics department to address. There's only so much mathematicians are going to devote their energies to, and addressing high school issues are probably not one of them. But one of the things that I found out was there are lots of talented students arriving at our universities. So here is an amazing figure. And when I mentioned this to our department, they did not believe it. So I was looking at enrollments in 3rd semester calculus in the fall. Right, 1st semester, right? Fall semester. It turns out 20% of those students are 1st-year students. That is, they earn credit for calculus in 1 and 2 in high school. And somehow they decided to take calculus 3 when they arrived. And again, the data shows that these students did better than the other students who started off with Calculus 1. Now, because of my aggressive advising of students, and you might look at an article that I wrote many years ago entitled Advising as an Aggressive Activity. I contact students, and because of that, lots of minority students were in this group taking Calculus 3. So, you know, honors courses are fine, but they might be ignoring the talent pool that is arriving at your university. And if you're going to be doing this, you have to answer a very important question. So, you know, you get a student who is taking Calculus 1 or 2 in high school. And the question is, are you prepared for Calculus 3? So if you take Calculus 3 and you do well, it looks really impressive. But if you fail it, it has dramatic repercussions. So here's an important question. What do you say to a student in advising them as to whether or not they should be doing this? But that's a different way, right, of handling these honor students. Because if you take Calculus 3 when you arrive, what that means is you can complete the math major in no more than 3 years. So that gives you plenty of time to investigate a new major or take graduate courses if that's the direction that you want to take. So this provides flexibility in your program of study. So I would encourage motion in this direction of placing students in the appropriate course, as opposed to having specialized courses for those students that you deem to be prepared for it.
Thank you. So I don't see more questions in either of the sources, but I wanted to ask you a closing question, if I may. Given this audience and the purpose of this conference is to really address the inequitable context of graduate education in the mathematical sciences in the US, we had a pretty broad-ranging discussion about underrepresented minorities in the math pipeline, so to speak, overall. What would you say, from your point of view, is an important focus for the graduate directors among our audience, or the people who are really thinking hard about what work they need to do within graduate education?
So admitting students into graduate programs is difficult, right? Anyone who has been a graduate director knows how difficult it is to evaluate a student. I personally think that domestic students are viewed as not proficient. And I think that that point of view has to change. Now, let's take a graduate program in pure mathematics, right? So what are the entry-level courses in the graduate program? Graduate algebra, graduate analysis, maybe graduate topology. Now, if a student has had the undergraduate equivalents of those courses and has performed well, that student has passed the bar, right? That doesn't mean you have to accept that student, but it means that this student is prepared. Now you have to investigate a little bit more. I think, you know, setting up a system whereby you contact the advisors of these students would help graduate directors make those decisions about whether or not to accept a student. And so it's going to take more time to make these evaluations. So maybe what that means is that graduate directors have to be given more release time in order to make contact with students and their mentors to try to determine what the potential of that student is. Sometime in the next 6 months, I'm going to have some article of mine published indicating what a horrible, miserable screw up I was as an undergraduate and no one accepted me into graduate school, period. And I am the luckiest person to have gotten into graduate school. And when this come out, maybe you could give it to your graduate advisor. I've had a pretty good career, so. Okay.
And I should repeat to you a comment that's in the chat that refers to your career path as being an inspiration. So
Oh, thank you.
just make sure that you saw that.
We are all inspirations, right? You're all amazing people.